Imagine that you're the public information officer for one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the country. Let's say the California Highway Patrol. And then imagine that your agency has a cherished and beloved Hollywood celebrity who has spent decades supporting your agency and has been a major factor in your agency's recruitment. Let's say someone like Eric Estrada from the TV show Chips. Now imagine that you just discovered about the worst PR news that you could possibly imagine, that a member of your agency, while on duty in a department vehicle, ran over Eric Estrada's dog. Now that's going to be a tough day for you as a public information officer, especially since the guilty party is you. Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Hey Chaplain is an officer wellness podcast produced for cops and covers topics like your career, your wellness, and law enforcement culture. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional retired cop turned first responder chaplain. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their hard-earned wisdom so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Today I'm talking to former Patrol Chief Mark Garrett, who was a division commander for the California Highway Patrol in LA County. And Mark is one of those cops who I could interview on just about a dozen topics. But today I'm just asking him what makes the California Highway Patrol special and what his career and experiences were like in the CHP. One story about a certain Hollywood celebrity in particular. Now, don't miss what Mark says about why he believes the Highway Patrol is a special breed of law enforcement officer. And I especially want you to notice what he says about the specific jobs and roles that he chose to do and which ones he chose not to do and why. Here's Mark Garrett. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
Jared, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. I'm really looking forward to it. You're the first person I've talked to from California Highway Patrol. And I'd like to ask about your career and like how you got started in it. I mean, how did you get into being a state police officer in California?
Totally by chance. That's the truth. I had a buddy that I grew up with, the same street I grew up with. He's about 6 years older than I am. He went into the CHP. About 6 years later, I had graduated college. I had been doing some professional athletics. And I thought, well, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And just on a whim, I asked my buddy Steve to bring an application for the California Highway Patrol home for me. And he did. And back then, you fill it out with pencil and paper, put in an envelope, mail it in. 18 months later, I was in the CHP Academy.
Were you getting information back? I mean, was it competitive to get in? What was the hiring environment like at that time?
It was very competitive as it is now, even though, all law enforcement is looking at a real crunch as far as recruitment challenge. Yeah. I think that more people 34 years ago, whatever it was when I applied, were more interested in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And so, the ratio from applicant to successful applicant was still very, very high. It was a very challenging process for, any of your listeners who've been through hiring process. I will say this, that California Highway Patrol was the only agency I applied for, and I made a commitment to myself that if the CHP didn't take me, I was never going to go into law enforcement.
Really?
I had such high regard and respect for the CHP's reputation. And that was really only enhanced by my friend Steve Foster, who brought that application home for me through his experience. And I was just very impressed with the reputation. So, I want to be part of an agency that I think is the best. And I was lucky enough to be successful through that process. But the background, the psychological screening, the whole process was very grueling, and it was worth every minute of it looking back.
I was going to ask what your impressions were before you got in. What did you know about the Highway Patrol? You had this friend who was a step ahead of you, And I'm sure that was a good resource as far as kind of getting to see it up close. But what was your knowledge of California Highway Patrol before you actually got in?
It's a very good question. There was very little personal knowledge I had of the CHP. I had a couple of interactions, negative ones, where I got some tickets while I was in college from San Jose, California Police Department, and a couple from the California Highway Patrol. And not that I had any really negative impressions of a particular officer, but I tell you right now, those couple of contacts I had with the CHP really had an effect on me. They actually left a very deep impression about their protocol, their professionalism. And of course, look, I was born in 1963. I grew up watching CHPs. I was very impressionable. People maybe don't take that seriously and talk about, well, CHPs had an impression. It actually really did. And it's also like I grew up with Adam 12 and Dragnet and things like that. All those things leave an impression. Yeah. But the CHP with the television, with my personal experiences, and then having listened to a very good friend of mine who at that point had been in the department for 6 years, he talked about the training. And the California Highway Patrol, even then, but especially now, it's one of only a couple of agencies left in the country that actually has a live-in academy. It's 24/7, just like the military. And
right.
Those things set it apart from other agencies I was somewhat familiar with. And that's kind of at 25 years old, kind of guided me into saying it's going to be CHP or nothing else, because in my opinion, they were a cut above other agencies.
Now, let me explain my impressions. I'm maybe 10 years younger than you, perhaps. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s in the Midwest in the United States, and each state has their own state police, the highway patrol or the state troopers. And anytime you would get pulled over on the highway, you would have this very sharply dressed, creased uniform, a Smokey the Bear hat kind of person walk up, going to be very professional. The demeanor and tone is going to be very like U.S. Marine Corps kind of vibe that they give typically. It's going to be your most professional, most physically fit police officer you're probably ever going to encounter. And that's typical of a lot of the state agencies here in the Midwest. Did you have a similar impression? I mean, I'm assuming that probably a lot of people now don't remember the CHP's TV show.
You bring up an excellent point comparing, all state agencies across the board, whether it's California or Michigan or Kansas or wherever it is. It certainly did. Highway Patrol did and still does have that reputation. I think one of the reasons that general impression, that image of state troopers is there is because it really is a different formula. It's a different set of circumstances that state agencies, state troopers, highway patrol officers have to deal with. In other words, your beat might be literally for the highway patrol, it might be 100 miles long, depending on where you work within the state. If you're out in the desert, or if you're up in some rural parts of Northern California, you can have some very long, very desolate beats. In other words, you have to depend on yourself. Mm-hmm. The Highway Patrol has relatively few sergeants per officer as compared to other municipal agencies. But for instance, LAPD, LA County Sheriffs, have a large number of supervisors. And the reason is because, number one, and this is absolutely true, I'm biased here, but it is a fact, the Highway Patrol trains their personnel differently. And again, it starts with that 24/7 living in academy. Yeah. So attention to detail and self-reliance is absolutely driven into you from day one, even before you get to the academy during the application process.
You have to be able to operate on your own.
You have to be. You have to be able to do that. And so I think that impression that you referred to it's well-founded, and there's a reason for it. So, yeah, there's that image of the lone highway patrolman out there, and it's not too far from reality. Okay. In rural areas. Here where I live in Los Angeles County, things like that, it is different. Things are a lot more compact. You have a lot of law enforcement to back you up, but it's a fair understanding of patrol officers.
What parts of the job surprised you? What parts were you surprised? Like, oh, I didn't realize this was an opportunity, or I didn't realize this was an option.
Well, when I first started, it was pretty much what I expected as far as opportunities, responsibilities of the department.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I started, the coolest thing, the thing that kind of impressed me the most was the size of our air operations in California. The California Highway Patrol, outside of the military, outside of the National Guard here in California, has the largest air force in California.
Right.
It's really impressive, especially when you get out in the rural areas here in Los Angeles County, Orange County, San Diego. It's not so robust because we don't need that many resources with our allied agencies. So we have a pretty good sized one. But it's impressive what the CHP does. Now, I'll tell you what really changed the responsibility of the Highway Patrol. In 1995, the CHP absorbed the state police. They were two different entities.
Okay.
And the state police have all of the state officers, state judges, the governor, on and on and on, all the responsibility to protect those individuals. The CHP absorbed all that. And that's when things really expanded as far as our reach into different aspects of law enforcement. And since then, the Highway Patrol has become a leader in every type of investigation you can imagine, from murder to rape, kidnapping, sex trafficking, counterfeit, everything. So we're tied into all of the FBI task forces, everything you can imagine the CHP is involved in, and also our role in protecting the president, vice president, and heads of states when they come to California. The CHP did and does all of the motorcade protection for those protectees, and I was a part of that detail for 20 years, so that was pretty cool as well. I think one of the things that most reasonable people probably understand but may not fully appreciate is the amount of paperwork.
Right.
That
doesn't make it into the TV show.
Doesn't make it in there. And I'll say one of the television series that actually did a very good job of that, I think, you go back to the 80s, and you're too young to remember, but one of my favorite shows was Hill Street Blues.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Hill Street Blues spent a lot of time showing people, pecking at the typewriter back then. Click, 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 on every assault and aggravated robbery and things like this. And that's what it actually looked like when I came on the department. Yeah. It was a pencil and paper. So when you see all of these extraordinarily fantastic crime scenes and traffic accident scenes, and then 20 minutes later, they're out tootling around on two motorcycles going to coffee, it doesn't work like that. And so that was one of the things that it was kind of an eye opener. And, when you're in training with your field training officers, been on the job for 10 years, and you just want to go out there and chase speed, and you have 3 injury accidents in your posse box you got to get done, and you're going to spend the next 8 hours writing papers. Like, oh my God, is this really what the job's all about? So that was an eye opener for me.
First, I guess I should clarify. Did you immediately go out on the road? Is that the normal route for all new
Yes.
highway patrolmen? I was going to ask if you were on a motorcycle or in a car.
So I was never on a motorcycle. The way it works is when you graduate from academy, get your assignment, you go right into training with your first of 3 or 4 field training officers, FTOs. And if you get off that successfully, your probationary period is 12 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Generally speaking, you can't apply to go back to the academy for motor training until you're off probation. Now, they do fudge that because they're shorter motors, and often you'll see guys going back there before probation. But generally speaking, you have to complete your probationary period. You put your application and go back to the academy for motor training. I never wanted to be a motor. I actually have a motorcycle I ride personally, but riding one on the job is a whole different story. You have to love that machine to do it, and that wasn't where I was. So I was in a car my entire patrol career.
So chips didn't have enough of an influence to get you in the motor, right?
No, it didn't.
Well, I did hear that you did have a run-in with some Chips royalty. One of the actors from that show was Eric Estrada, and I hear you have an Eric Estrada story.
Yes, it's one that as I get older, Jared, I guess I can let more of it out of the bag. Or let
The
it out of the
statute of
bag more
limitations
often.
has passed. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was I met Eric, who my goodness, what a great friend, not just to the Highway Patrol, but to all law enforcement. He's a true believer in the rule of law. He's a great dad. He's a great partner to everybody in this, our community. And I got to meet him through my public affairs job when I eventually went into and actually, did a desk job, and later on became the public information coordinator, the sergeant for all the PIO stuff and recruitment in Los Angeles County. One day, I called Eric up and I said, "Hey, Eric, I need to come over and pick up an autograph, blah, 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 for XYZ event coming up." "Yeah, Mark, come over. He's about 20 minutes from my office. So I hop in an unmarked CHP SUV and get up to Eric's house. And Eric has this long, very narrow driveway it's very steep from the street up to his property. It's very narrow between two like cinder block walls and beautifully landscaped. So I get up to the top, go in the house, we chew the fat for a while. I get the stuff I need. And he's like, "All right, take it easy." I said, "I'll see you later on, Eric." I hop in the SUV. And as I look behind me, I see Eric has already walked out his front door and gone on the steps to the street to bring in his trash cans. And so I'm just backing up and I'm looking down at Eric. And I'm looking down, and as I'm driving, I thought I felt something, a kind of a bump. And I thought, man, did I hit one of his pots? These beautiful planters from the side of the driveway. I don't feel a scrape, and I don't see anything. So I kept on going. And I'm going really slow, and Eric turns around for the trash cans. He sees me, and he screams at the top of his lungs, "Mark, stop!" I go, "Uh-oh, what did I hit?" And he walks up to the side. He's up above me because now these walls are kind of tall. I'm driving between. And he's standing on his property. He kind of looks into my window. He goes, "Mark, you just ran the dog over."
Oh, no.
And mortified, of course, doesn't begin to describe how I felt. Now, I did know these dogs were twins. They were sisters. And at the time, they were about 85 years old each. And I don't mean dog years. I mean, like, they must have been like 700 years old in dog years. And this particular dog was blind and deaf.
Oh, no.
But she was about 16 years old, if I remember. And she was still walking around. So what she had done, Jarrett, she had walked through the yard and she had fallen off that ledge into the driveway right after I started backing up. I never saw her. She was too close to the back of the truck. No backup cameras back then. But it's still my fault. And here I am.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're trying to play this out like Suicide by Cop. And,
yes, exactly. But here I am. I'm the public information sergeant. I'm on duty in a state ride, and and
you've killed Eric Estrada's dog.
I mean,
oh my!
if people didn't know, was in fact, they think I'm making this up. The dog, but here's the worst part: the dog is still alive, it's still breathing, and blood's come out everywhere. We put it in a blanket, we throw it in the back of the SUV. He goes, "Mark, there's a vet down the hill." I go code 3. I'm blowing red lights. I get down there. We get him to the vet. And the vet comes out like in 2 minutes and "Listen, there's nothing to save here. She's just all broken up." And Eric goes, "I get it." Oh. Now, I know this is dragging on a little bit, but here is the craziest part of the story, if that's not crazy enough. Eric calls his wife, who's just an angel on earth. He calls her, tells her what happened, blah, blah, blah. We get back to the house. Now she's home. I walk in the house, and Nanette, his wife, she runs over. I thought she was going to slap me. She runs over and she hugs me and gives me this gigantic kiss in the cheek. "Oh, Mark, thank you. I said, Are you nuts? What's wrong with you people?" And she said, "Look, we were going to have to put that dog to sleep. And Eric and I, neither of us had the heart to tell our daughter that we put her to sleep. And now you just forced it on us. And we're so glad it's over with." Oh. And I thought, "You've got to be kidding me." So at the end of the day, I was this really weird hero for them, and we're still friends.
That's awful. That's awful. Oh, my goodness. You had the opportunity to move through your career and have a few different jobs. You were on the road. You were PIO. Tell me where your career eventually went.
So from that time as the PIO coordinator, that really, I tell people, that was the real turning point for my career. I never wanted to be a sergeant, not at all. I spent a few years in the field as a sergeant, and I went back into public affairs. They asked me to come back to division headquarters, and I never wanted to do it. I never wanted to be a sergeant. I certainly didn't want to be an administrative sergeant. I wanted to go back in the field. I kind of got voluntold. But, sometimes when we do things we don't want to do, they open up doors we never even imagined existed. And that's what happened. So when I went back into public affairs as a sergeant, I did that for 4 years. And the exposure I got, not only at the division level, but all the way up to the headquarters level in Sacramento, really built relationships with people that I would later work with and work for. And because for whatever crazy reason they appreciated my work ethic or my style or whatever it was, when there was a chance to put in for an opening of the next promotional list, I think maybe I got a little extra, consideration, and that might be a good fit. Not to say there weren't a ton of other people that were as good or better than I was.
No, but if you were a known quantity, that does help. It
does help. Yeah. When people are looking for chemistry, they're looking for a good fit that can help. When you have people who are otherwise equal, and so it certainly helped. But that took me from there to lieutenant, up to captain, assistant chief, and eventually chief. But I tell people all the time that was a job I did not want to do because it's grueling. The public information job here in Los Angeles County for the Highway Patrol is 24/7. But my goodness, did it pay off, and it paid off not only for me, but for my family.
Yeah. Let me ask, with the public information aspect of it now, what kind of incidents were the California Highway Patrol dealing with in Los Angeles County? Is it mostly traffic accidents? Or are there other investigations that you're reporting to the media on?
Pretty much, you pick your poison. Everything from high-profile traffic accidents, arrest of celebrities, arrest of public officials, elected officials, internationally viewed pursuits, freeway standoffs, and then, of course, a multitude over the years of officer-involved shootings, many of which were fatal, different types of incidents, but they're really endless. I mean, here in LA County, we had to deal with the Michael Jackson funeral. So I actually had to go out before, and I actually met with all of his brothers at one of the brothers' homes about an hour from where I'm sitting now. And because I was a public information sergeant, and the CHP had to do all the traffic control for the movement of the casket, and from the funeral home to burial, all these things, the CHP handled all that. And boy, did I take a lot of heat for that. Well, why are you giving Michael Jackson a funeral escort? I didn't get one for my mother. I didn't get one for my father. I'm thinking, well, if we didn't do that, and the traffic jam with the paparazzi is shut down the 405, the 101, you'd be calling me and say, how come you guys didn't do traffic control? How come you didn't escort this? So, and again, those officer-involved shootings were some of the most significant things I dealt with in that role.
Talk to me about the protective services detail. That's a pretty big deal. That's going to put you not only with a very important responsibility, but also in close proximity to very important people. Tell me what that experience was like.
Well, you know what? It really was one of the highlights of my career. That may sound like a cliche, but it truly was. When you're in it, in the moment, you're doing your job. And again, I wasn't a motor cop, and that's one of the places where motor cops really earn their money. And car cops and motor cops like to have this nice rivalry, but the car cops had to admit how much the motors worked on those details. And I started working that detail in 1994. My very first protective services detail was Richard Nixon's funeral here in Southern California. It was one of the largest details that I worked because we had so many.
Multiple presidents and
Yep. And that went all the way through. The last detail that I worked was with Donald Trump. And so this spectrum over, 20, pushing 30 years, and seeing different personalities. But like I said, you're in the moment when you're doing this. And for most of my career, I was the guy driving the lead vehicle. So the president was directly behind my CHP unit. And so I have Secret Service in the back with me. My sergeant was in the right front seat, who's the detail commander. And it's an example about the Highway Patrol. You go to other agencies that do this, and they'll have a commander, assistant chief, a chief as the detail commander. The detail commander for the presidential motorcade in the Highway Patrol is always a sergeant, a first line supervisor. And one of the reasons is, Jared, is that we are trained so well by the Secret Service, first of all, about what they would like from us. And they give us very realistic training. I say us, I've been retired for going on 3 years, but you get it. But the other side is, from an internal point of view, the Highway Patrol, the CHP knows the level of training they've given their own sergeants, and they know the expectations they set for their sergeants. So they place a lot of responsibility on those first-line supervisors. But when you're doing that, you understand, my goodness, I'm responsible for the safety of the leader of the free world. So when you get a chance to meet these people and they say thank you, and I've met numerous presidents, it's really kind of an awe-inspiring moment where I'm saying, God, I'm shaking hands with this gentleman who is the president, and I have partial responsibility for protection. It was a huge honor. It was a real privilege to be a part of that detail for so long. And I have pictures from multiple presidents here in my house that I have great photo ops with, and I'll treasure them for the rest of my life.
As I said in the intro, Mark is one of those officers who has such a wide breadth of experience that a podcaster could probably do multiple interviews with him. So I did. And although I definitely wanted to get that Eric Estrada story recorded, it wasn't really my primary reason for talking to Mark Garrett. I wanted to talk to him about the influence of his family history, about living in LA in the 1990s as a black cop, and about serving with honor in law enforcement. We're going to talk about all of that and more in my next interview with Mark Garrett. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
The biggest detractors and biggest supporters I ever found in law enforcement were people in the black community.
So you saw both extremes in the same
Both
community.
extremes.
Yeah. Okay.
It was either I was Uncle Tom, sellout, and other words I will not use on your show, other terms that were, vile, or I would respond to a scene, I'd show up, or I even stop somebody, and they would say, "Young man, thank you. We need more black cops like you. We need more cops of any color in this neighborhood. We need help. Thank you. Come up here." I mean, just cheerleaders. And then you go, your next stop, and you were Satan incarnate.
If you have questions or comments, or perhaps if you would just like to interact with me, then my email is in the show notes, and you can interact with me further by going to find Hey Chaplain on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And by finding me on social media, you can see pictures of some of the people that I interview and some of the patches and challenge coins that different departments from around the country have sent me. The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.